Yo, what they do. I'm your host, Aaron J. Jackson, also known as Marvin Bay. I welcome you to the 40th episode of Behind the Beer podcast, presented by the FGO Network. And right here, we got the legendary Jeffery Salters. And I just want to say, this is not your ordinary episode, because this is one of the few people that's like very impactful for my life. He's one of my mentors in the photography world. And I just want you to know that as well, too. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate it. I'm very flattered that you would think that.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that whatever I share with you definitely helps you.
Yeah.
Because it takes a whole village of us to become good
Most
in this
definitely.
industry,
Most definitely.
And it's all about sharing, and it's about helping, lifting each other up and as artists.
Mm-hmm. So for the people that go ahead.
And thanks for watching this presentation, and I hope you will get something out of it as well.
Mm-hmm. So for the people that don't know who you are, introduce yourself. This one.
Well, I've been shooting pictures for a good chunk of change, but my name, as Aaron said, is Jeffery Salter, and that's Jeffery.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people spell it Jeffery, but I'm an Ery. It's funny a story about that, because I had to buy 2 websites because of the misspelling of my name.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I'm based in Miami, Florida. I'm a magazine, editorial, and fine art photographer. And I've been shooting pictures since I was about 14. And I've done many things as a photographer. I was a combat cameraman in the U.S. Navy for about 5 years. I assisted one of the iconic African-American fashion photographers of all time, and that's Anthony Barboza in New York City. And I've worked for 5 newspapers. And along the way, I was a staffer at the New York Times. I've been a staffer at the Sports Illustrated and a staffer at the Miami Herald, the local paper. But I could say that I've dedicated my life to being a visual communicator. I really believe in the power of images, and that's my chosen method of communicating what I see, sharing what I feel, what I see, and bringing people into different worlds.
Okay. For the people that don't know, I met you through it was like the it was a zine fair back in
Exactly.
2017, and it was one of my first books, and you took a look at it, and then I was just amazed because you just told me who you are, which I honestly thought was just regular, and then I looked at your work, I was just like, wow, stunning. And the fact that you photographed a lot of impactful people over the years. But before we dived into your story and how you came up, how have you been doing during the pandemic, and how do you honestly feel about the whole situation?
Wow! In the beginning, when it first hit us in March, I think it probably actually hit us in January. We just didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a shock, but because my industry involves people actually going out to newsstands, going to bookstores, or going to drugstores and buying magazines,
mm-hmm.
because I'm a magazine photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do advertising, and then there's not much advertising photography being done now, because people just don't know what to say in the ads.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning of the pandemic, things pretty well shut down a lot. Then slowly but surely I've been getting more work, but it's now it requires a lot of COVID testing. Every shoot I have to do, I have to get a COVID test.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting really used to getting that straw up my nose, unfortunately. But
Yeah, that could be annoying. That could be annoying.
Yeah, that is annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I'm working on a photography book. I've been
Mhm.
shooting portraits of athletes for the last 35 years.
Mhm.
Like I was telling you before, I have Usain Bolt when he was 18 years old,
Yeah.
playing video games in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the aspects of that shoot, I took him to a very famous beach in Kingston called Hellshire Beach. So I know all you Jamaicans know that beach. And where you can get some delicious red snapper there.
Mm-hmm.
But I had Usain Bolt riding a horse on that beach, and I photographed him on a horse. he didn't know how to ride the horse, so I kind of talked him into doing it and posed the shot. So. My friends joke with me about that because I could have ended his career if the horse had thrown him.
Wow. But how do it feel to, by you talking about the book, how does it feel photographing for over 35 years in your life? Like, how does that feel? Do you, like, pinch yourself about it? Or, and by the way, put the mic more to your face. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just feel that I just have a lot of gratitude to the people who allowed me to take their picture and open the doors. Because a photograph is an equal exchange of energy. I mean, and like anything in life, it should be a fair exchange of energy.
Yeah.
When I meet someone to take their portrait, I want to show something about them. I want to share a glimpse into their soul and share that with the world, you know. So it takes people to trust you, get comfortable with you, and to have them relax enough for you to capture an evocative portrait of someone. But that's not the, you know, besides portrait work, I also, I started out as a photojournalist. And one of my beats was in Haiti. And from 1987 to 1997, I covered many of the political upheaval that was going on in Haiti and different things that were happening. Election violence, famine, drought, hurricanes, whatever. But whenever I went there, I always strove to show Haitians as people, because things happen to you as being a human being on the planet, you know, and you shouldn't define yourself. You shouldn't be defined by things that happen to you. And I'll give you an example. Some journalists, when they're assigned to photograph something in the inner city, they only photograph people on their front porch. But I never do that. I go inside people's homes. And allow them to show who they really are, because it's we're all different, but we all want the same things in life. You know, we want health, good health, education, food, a good job, and education for our kids, you know. So I don't really define people by what things that happen to them. So I'm just saying this, that I always try to take another step when I'm taking a portrait, or if I'm doing a photojournalistic piece about someone, to go another step further.
Right.
You know, and that means instead of just taking a picture of somebody at the screen door and calling it a day, you knock and say, "Hey, can I come in? Can I see your son's room? Or can you sit down? Let me do a portrait of you at your dining room table." You
to have that intimacy, in the photograph.
Right, exactly, and that intimacy humanizes the people you photograph.
Exactly.
Because that's part of the problem with photojournalism, is that a lot of journalists dehumanize people by only showing them at their worst or showing them as victims. You know. So, and my point is saying this is that whenever I would go to Haiti, I would always go into people's houses and things like that, or into their farms, or into wherever, into their churches. I always made it a point to go in.
And that falls back into trust.
Right. Well, you know, trust is not a matter of trust is colorblind. You know, the energy you put out there as a person is reflected back. Right. You know, you know, unless you're going up photographing a gang or something, and they're all crazy. But most time, people can read your intentions as a journalist or as a photographer. You know, and you know that's has been my experience. You know, that I just try to put out good energy as an artist or a photographer or a journalist. Right.
So, other than photography, how did you? Well, first, where you from originally, and what was your upbringing like growing up?
Actually, let me tell another story. But let me tell you about my first camera. We should probably call this conversation 100 lawns, because that's how many lawns I mowed over a summer to buy my first professional camera.
Wow.
Yeah, and then when I told my dad what I did with the money from cutting those lawns, I said I bought a camera. He almost had a heart attack. I can just like he put his hand over his heart and says, "What?" And I said, "Don't worry, Dad. This is gonna be the last camera I ever buy. It's a professional camera. It's gonna last me on my entire career. It's a Canon AE1."
Wow. You know I had that camera too.
Yeah, Canon AE1 film camera. Yeah.
Wow.
So he passed away recently, but every once in a while, whenever I would see him, go back to visit him in Texas, he would ask me, "Hey, do you still got that camera?" And I'd kind of shake my head and says, "No, I bought many more since then." And since in Texas is where I bought my first camera. I'm an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. I say I'm from Texas because that's where I graduated from high school.
Okay.
But when you're an Army brat, you move every 3 years. So I've lived all over the world, from Texas to Missouri to Ohio to France, to Paris, France, to Germany, all over. The places that my dad was being stationed at.
What do you think drew you into photography?
It was an accident in Texas because I was in the 9th grade or 8th grade, and I signed up for an art course, and it said graphic arts. I signed up for the course, and then the next Monday when school started, it turned out to be photographic arts.
Wow. Yeah.
So I just stayed with it because photography was a lot of fun, and it's a lot. It's something where people it's a very inviting art form. Most people want to be photographed. They want to share what they're doing with you. So it's skinny kid in Texas with big afro and big glasses, and and I was very shy, and it was an entree to people's lives.
Over time, who were the photographers that inspired you to become or enhance your work or becoming a photojournalist or a photographer as a whole?
Well, first off, I would obviously say Gordon Parks.
That's
and not because he's a black photographer.
No.
It's because he is a Renaissance mind. He's a Da Vinci of our field. He's an iconic photographer. He does everything. Filmmaking,
does it all.
Classical music composition, poet, novelist, still photographer, photojournalist, fashion photographer. He did it all, so he was a good roadmap.
I believe he started with fashion. That's how he started, and then he enhanced his work into what he's at right now.
Right, and and that's because he had a vision. He had something to say. Because like right now during over recent events with Mr. Floyd and the Black Lives Movement, I get interviewed and people ask me about, what does it feel about being a black photographer? How does it feel to be a black photographer or this like that? And I just tell them, I said, look, this blackness is my shell, and this shell was strong. It's been pounded. It's been molded from everything I went through as an African American in this country. But my images are the pictures I produce are from my mind, from how I put out, how I translate what's happened to me. So it's not so much that I'm this black photographer. But no, I'm not just a black photographer.
Yeah, you don't even think of that. Yeah.
Who's experienced certain things that may make me a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah.
Maybe make me more, have me a little bit more empathetic to how people are dealing with life.
Right. How did you? I know you talked about you had a class. You chose the class, ended up being photography. But how did you end up mastering the rules of the photography world?
Well, my instructor was this old guy named Mr. Cooper, and the first camera he gave me was a Speed Graphic, which is a film camera, and it takes 4x5 sheet film. So
large format.
Large format. But let me go back to you asked me about my influences. Besides Anthony Barboza, or like Art Kane, I like Annie Leibovitz. There were a lot of photographers who were just taking care of business back then, or
Mhm.
Bert Stern, Roy DeCava.
Mhm.
So there were a lot of iconic photographers, and people were really into images then.
Mhm.
They had Life magazine, which have all the permanent photographers.
Mhm.
Eugene Smith, great photojournalist, who actually lived with his subjects. He did a story about Minamata. He did mercury poisoning, and he even got mercury poisoning himself
Mhm.
while he was doing these stories in Japan. So, he put his skin on the game. He one thing about photographers, we have to be there. We have to witness. We can't be a writer and just hey, phone up the subject and get the story later.
Mhm.
We have to witness.
Mhm.
So it's very important that when we witness things, we know how to witness and we know when to click the shutter.
Mhm.
But getting back to how I got on this path, so after high school, I was able to, while studying photography at high school, I was also able to go on the military base and work with soldiers and use the lab and also talk to them about their experiences as photographers in the military.
Mhm.
So what ended up happening was, while I was when I graduated from high school, I decided to join the Navy and go to their school. They had a photography school
Mhm.
in Pensacola, Florida. So I went there and I studied photojournalism, studied photography, and from using all kinds of cameras, from Bolexes to Leicas to 4x5s, just expanded my range of knowledge in the art form.
Mhm.
So this also added on to the knowledge I had gained as being a photographer, studying photography in school, in high school.
Mhm.
Because while in high school, I was on the yearbook and the newspaper, the student newspaper.
Mhm.
So I would cover sports for the newspaper and things like that.
Mhm.
So afterwards, after I graduated from high school, like I said before, I joined the Navy.
Mhm.
And I went to their school. And then my first job in the military, they sent me to a lab in Hawaii. And my job was to basically develop film that was from aerial cameras.
Wow.
And these aerial photographs were pictures of Chinese fishing ships, because you can tell what a ship is by looking at the antennas.
Mhm.
So these were like Chinese spy ships in the Pacific, spying on us and spying on ships going crossing the Pacific Ocean.
Mhm.
But right across from the lab was a little office, and in that office was two photographers. Their names were Jim Bryant and Harry Gerwin, and they were combat cameramans.
Mhm.
So one day I said, "Hey, I wanted to take a look at my work." So I went over to their office and I showed them my work, and he says, "Whoa, hold up! You need to be in this office."
That reminds me of the movie God of War. I mean, not God of War.
Tell me about it.
I always get confused with the name, but I always forget the name of the movie. But it was actually filmed in I believe in Brazil. And the guy the kid just ended up getting a camera, and he started photographing all the drug lords around around the community or whatever. And then he ended up going to the newspaper, and his friend worked at the newspaper, and they looked at the negatives, and they were just like, "Yeah, you need to be on the team." And
yeah. So those guys said, "Hey, you need to be in this office. You need to be a photojournalist. You need to be out there documenting the world. You don't need to be in that lab developing pictures of antennas." Because they believed in me. So they helped me work for a year. They helped me put together a portfolio, and I sent that portfolio to Syracuse University, and I won a scholarship to go to Syracuse.
Wow.
So the Navy let me go for 2 years to Syracuse to study photojournalism, and then after those 2 years, it was an intensive program at Syracuse. I went back in the military where I was a combat cameraman.
Wow.
So I would go, and my only job was there was no combat going on, so I would go to someplace in Africa, and some soldiers would paint a school building.
Wow.
Or I'd go to Europe and photograph a Normandy D-Day celebration.
And you was hired to do all that for them?
Yeah, I would just fly around the world and do that. I
Mhm.
spent 6 months in South America, just going to every country doing stories about military American soldiers doing things, working on schools or doing a charity event or whatever they would do.
All right.
I just photographed these people doing the military soldiers, American soldiers participating with the community.
Mhm.
Or like one day I did there was a sailor who was a motorcycle racer,
Mhm.
and he was in this race called the Isle of Man, TT race in the Isle of Man. So I flew to the Isle of Man, which is a little island off the coast of London, off the coast of the United Kingdom, and I photographed him racing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So around that time, what do you think was the most things that you were challenged as being a photographer or becoming a full-time photographer as a whole?
Well, I mean, I have a little. I have to thank your parents for paying their taxes because
Yeah.
in those days we were shooting film. We were shooting Kodachrome, and so I was just shooting Kodachrome slides, and I would just send them to. I'd send them to Washington D.C. where the magazines were, and they would publish them, process it, and publish them for me. Or they'd be in the Library of Congress. And I had Leicas, I had great equipment that our taxpayers were paying for.
Yeah, yeah.
So so in that case, like I said, I was, I benefited by the taxpayers and by the military supporting me in my craft.
Yeah.
So when I finished my tour of the military, I moved to New York City. Well, before I was finishing my tour of the military, I wrote a letter to Anthony Barboza, the fashion photographer in New York City, and I asked that I asked for a job. So when I got in the military, I worked for him in New York.
And how was that?
Yeah, well, it was great. I mean, I got to I was his assistant, so I got to develop his film for his fine art photography, and I got to bring him Chinese cold noodles. So it was a great little. A great experience.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I was in New York, and I kept, sometimes I'd fall asleep in the subway and I'd miss my subway stop and be late for work, but be late for the shoot, whatever. But it didn't happen very often, you know.
How was, what was your big opportunity in your perspective that you got and you was like amazed by it? Your first big break, in your opinion?
Well, I mean,
There's been so many, right?
I appreciate what.
I said, been so many, right?
Well, I appreciate every opportunity I've been given as an artist, you
Yeah.
know, to grow, you know, from, you know. So I worked for Tony for a year, and then someone else heard about me and asked me to send my portfolio to a newspaper. So I got my first newspaper job. And that was at a small paper in New Jersey called the Bergen Record. So while I was there, I did a story about Newark. I spent 2 weeks in the city of Newark just doing personal stories, photojournalism stories, meeting people on the street, and they'd invite me into their homes. And I took them back to the newspaper, and they submitted the photographs to the Pulitzer Committee, and I was a finalist for a Pulitzer based on those pictures that I did in Newark. So the small newspaper gave me an opportunity to grow my craft, and I won some awards. So every time I won some awards at the small newspaper, and then that caught the eye of some editors at a larger paper, and that was New York Newsday in New York City. So I started working for them. And in New York, they would send me to Europe to cover fashion. And one time I was covering fashion in London, and my beeper went off, and they said, hey, we need you to go to Belfast.
Wow.
Because in Belfast, somebody threw a grenade in a crowd of worshipers. So they wanted me to stop shooting the fashion and go there and do the journalism piece. So as a newspaper photographer, you got a lot of experience to do things like that. You know, one day you'd be shooting fashion, the next day you'd be shooting a fire. And working at a larger newspaper, they had a budget that could send you around the world to do things, you know. One time I was sent down to South Florida when I was living in New York to basically follow a hurricane that they didn't know where it was going to be hitting.
Mm.
So I started in Miami and I drove all the way up the coast, and finally it was hitting off the hurricane was going to, Hugo was going to hit off the coast of North Carolina.
Mm.
And me and the writer were just getting into our hotel room when the storm was about to hit. And even driving to the hotel, the power lines were whipping on across the road, and we couldn't see anything, and we thought we were going to just die. So as soon as we got into our hotel room, we took a mattress and we put it against the door and put some furniture against the door because it was very dangerous and the wind was coming up really hard.
Because you was right by the coastal right there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we just didn't have we don't have an iPhone to be able to track the storm. We just says, oh, we're in it.
Yeah. Wow, what a time! Because that was like way back, like 90s, early 90s.
Yeah, yeah. No, early 80s.
Oh, wow.
No, I was in. So I was working in Haiti from 87 to 97. So late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So around that time, we didn't have. I mean, you didn't have digital. You didn't have film. Like, how was that process like versus now? Like now, it's a digital world. Not to trying to jump into the present.
Well, it was a lot different because, for instance, when I was working in Haiti, we shooting film. Mm-hmm. We'd have to, cover whatever the story of the day was, mm-hmm. and then we had to go and get it processed. Mm-hmm. We had to process the film in a closet in our hotel room, and then look at the negative, and then we had to take the negative to Associated Press, and Associated Press would make a print for us, and they'd put it on this machine, like a cylinder machine, mm-hmm. and it would read the photographs in an optical scanner, and it would send the photograph over an analog phone line to New York City.
Wow.
So it was like it wasn't like sending the phone from us, sending the image digitally from the sat phone, mm-hmm. or from your iPhone. It was like having to process the film, print it, and scan it, mm-hmm. in a disc, in a cylinder, mm-hmm. optical scanner.
Yeah.
So it it wasn't so much about, and you never knew what you got until you processed the film,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy.
And it wasn't out of focus, and it wasn't like. You'd pretty much have to use your craft, mm-hmm. to know what you were getting, to kind of know that you were getting a good, mm-hmm. image,
Yeah, we had a little bit delay, but so we back. So we were just talking about more of your transition from coming from New York, to South Florida from the hurricane. But when did you transition from New York, or what made you transition from New York to coming down here to South Florida?
Well, actually, I was recruited by. Mm-hmm. I ended up coming to live in South Florida because I was hired. I was recruited, mm-hmm. from the picture editor at the Miami Herald.
Okay.
He was my best friend. C.W. Griffin was a photographer, a longtime sports photographer, great photojournalist at the Miami Herald. Mm-hmm. Was here, and. He was looking for an African American. The Herald was looking for an African American photographer, and the editor was thinking like, "Oh, there aren't any great African American photographers, so or at least I don't know any." So my friend said, "Hey, I know someone." So, so the editor of Miami Herald flew to New York City, and he interviewed me, and he saw my work, and he hired me on the spot. Mm-hmm. And even sweeten up the deal is they knew they had to pay me, so they paid me my New York salary to work in Miami.
Wow.
So I was making more down here than what I was making in New York City.
Oh,
because I said, look, you got to pay my salary and you got to sweeten the pie a little bit.
That's crazy because you would think New York would be a little bit more higher because of how just New York.
Well, it was higher, but they just they knew that to recruit me to bring me down to Miami, mm-hmm. they had to match my salary. I mm-hmm. couldn't come down to take less money.
Mm-hmm. So how was that like? Working for a newspaper like that? Because the Miami Herald, me living in Miami all my life, Miami Herald is pretty big. But how was
at
that?
The time, The Miami Herald was one of the top 10 newspapers in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, back in the day, the Miami Herald was on and popping. Yeah, they had a great budget. They fly photographers around the world to cover stories, and they had a tradition of using photography well.
That makes sense because when I look at their archives around like the 80s and the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, their work, well, the photographers or the photojournalists, their work is kind of like amazing. I just looked at, their archives and it was just, that makes sense of what you're saying.
Yeah, the Herald's won a ton of Pulitzers for documentaries in the Caribbean, for covering the Hurricane Andrew, and there were some other Pulitzers that they had won too that escapes my memory right now, but. Yeah, but my point is the Herald was an award-winning paper when I joined it.
Wow.
So I was pleased to be on staff. But you talk about newspapers. I was always working for a newspaper, but I never saw myself as a newspaper photographer. I always was thinking that I want to be a magazine photographer. I want to be a commercial photographer or advertising photographer. So when I would go on an assignment for the Miami Herald, I always brought lights and I always brought the equipment so I can make my pictures more than what you would expect. That's for like the portraits and environmental portraits. But even when I was doing news stories, I always photographed in a way that gave my pictures more of a magazine look, trying to use composition, strong composition. I didn't put my subject in the center of the frame or anything like that. Sometimes my subject will be tiny in the frame, and I tilt the camera, but I try to create tension within the frame.
To tell the story.
Yeah, to tell the story rather than just walk up there and shoot a picture and leave the scene. Because my philosophy as an artist or a photographer is that you should always begin with the end in mind. So sure, you're shooting for a small paper, or sure, you're shooting for Instagram, but your work's not always going to be there. If you're going to make it strong and if your visuals are very creative, your pictures have a life beyond the purpose they were created for. I mean, just like a lot of photographers, think the path to glory is just becoming famous on Instagram.
We always talk about that all the time too.
I mean, that's fine, but if you can't let your mind, your eye be trained only to see pictures
digitally
that small, or see the pictures, because then it changes your composition, changes the way you see images, because you're trying to only shoot just for this tiny square instrument, But like me, one of these days, I'd like to see my work up in a gallery, like a big gallery, like at the Museum of Modern Art or the Tate Modern at London. You want to create iconic pictures that stand the test of time, and they have the quality, put the craftsmanship and the quality into the images,
Right.
You use the best camera you can afford, and and always try to produce work that's not trendy, but that it has a classical quality. That 10 years down the line, that picture can like blow up someplace.
More for like the long term perspective. Yeah. So, we talked about the transition into like the film world, how you used to develop film to take it to the APs of the world and stuff like that. But I know at one point in time, film, it was a digital realm. Like probably like the early 2000s, would you say the digital started to come in, or what year would you say?
Well, I mean, the digital's been around since around that time. But those first digital cameras were only 1 megapixel.
Oh, wow.
And you had the camera, and you had to carry this huge briefcase to tether to the camera. So they were only used for sports and news.
When did you finally transition to film from digital officially?
Well, since I was always a portrait photographer, since when I left the newspapers, I was still doing film. because I was a portrait photographer, and
Right.
they weren't in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't in a rush to have the film the digital. They didn't need a digital file.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they can always scan the negative, scan the chrome later.
Mm-hmm.
There was no rush.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the advantage of staying filmed longer while other people are doing digital is that I was shooting medium format film. So
My favorite, by the way.
yeah, so I would use an RZ,
Oh, wow.
Mamiya RZ.
Mm-hmm.
So the format of the RZ film,
6x7.
yeah, 6x7, is the same format as a magazine cover.
I didn't know that.
So when the editor was looking at film or digital files on a computer or 35 millimeter slides on a light box, when you deliver a job that was shot in 4x5 or 6x7, it stood out. It just jumped off the light table and it fit. All they need to do is scan it and it would be a perfect cover.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tried to shoot for a cover. You know, I'd shoot even if the job was saying, "Oh, this is only for the inside use." I try to take the subject to the side, get a clean background or neutral background, and shoot it for a cover.
Mm-hmm.
So I would deliver the picture that they wanted for the inside, but I'd also give them an option for a cover.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Was it hard to transition, like from film to digital, overall?
Well, no, because what I did was I started using medium format digital cameras.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the whole like, when would you use like large format? Like, what was the like overall, like, I guess you could say the like what assignments would you use for a large format? Like,
Well, I mean, what I would do is
because large format's a lot of processing that goes on with that.
well, if I had time, it would always depend on the deadline of the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
But what I liked about the large format is that, you know, you do your shots with the 35 millimeter quick stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or with the medium format camera. But then, you know, when the subject saw this camera, this huge big 4x5 or 8x10 camera on a
Mm-hmm.
tripod, they would slow down because they know that, hey, I'm in for something special.
Mm-hmm.
So you could take your time. You know, you only shot like maybe 5 or 6 sheets, but you know, you find a good spot, and the subject, it would change the mood on the set,
Mm-hmm.
change the mood of the subject, and they'd give you more introspective. They relax more. They says, well, this guy's serious. Look at this big camera.
Yeah,
He's creating an image of me that's going to stand the test of times.
Mm-hmm.
So I always tried to do that. You know, shoot a
Mm-hmm.
4x5, or after I shot the assignment, either 35 millimeter digital or 35 millimeter film,
Mm-hmm.
or 6x7 RC, or medium format digital.
Mm-hmm. So you photographed celebrities, athletes, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, while you photographing them, how is it like photographing them and getting like, or just documenting them at that right moment, or at that moment overall? Because you get them for like, what, 30 minutes to an hour, you know?
Well,
so,
I mean, like I said before, I like to think that I'm blessed by anyone who comes in front of my camera,
Yeah.
because it's an exchange of energy. So, but in the case of celebrities, sometimes I may get them for 30 minutes. Sometimes I get them for 4 hours. It depends on how many setups we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just treat people all the same,
Yeah.
with goodness and respect, and you know, and just try to build that trust, so they'd give me a good photograph, or they'd relax and give me something unique about them, insight in their character visually.
But you don't really like just think about just, for instance, you photograph Serena Williams, or
Well, yeah, I've
like the
I
greats.
photographed Serena Williams. I photographed Paris Hilton in the bathtub. I
Yeah.
photographed Fiona Apple. A lot of different stars, you know.
You don't feel anything about it, like, you know, that's a legend. Not too many people could say they photograph these monumental people. You know, you got them in the rim for like, you know, you step in the room with them, and you just actually you document them in a way that most people don't really get to see on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it's a bit of a bump up.
Yeah, yeah.
but it's cool because you talk about Serena Williams.
Mm-hmm.
I photographed her at least 3 times throughout her
Right.
career,
Mm-hmm.
and one time I even photographed her in her closet because it was a fashion story. So we were doing a story about what Serena Williams wears. So I photographed her in her closet. And then when she was younger, I photographed her in L.A. And then most recently, I photographed her for the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine
In the studio.
in Wimbledon.
Oh, yeah, Wimbledon.
In Wimbledon. And I was actually on vacation. I travel a lot when I'm on vacation. I went to Italy, and I was in Venice, Italy. And the editor of the magazine called me and says, "Hey, we need you to get off your vacation and fly to London to do a portrait of Serena Williams for the cover of Sports Illustrated for the most fashionable woman. No, for the top athlete in the world."
Mm-hmm.
So I set up everything from Venice, and then I hired a crew and a production team in the UK, and then I flew there, and then we just found studios, and we found the props, and we all worked together to make the shoot happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing about that shoot is, well, the great thing about the shoot, and it reflects about how Serena is as a person, is that she had a long day of practice at Wimbledon, and she actually hurt herself, and she was 3 hours late to the shoot because she was at the hospital getting taken care of, with the doctor taken care of. But she came to the shoot anyway.
Wow.
She came to the shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave it 100%, you know. So not only is she a great athlete on the field, she's, you know, when she says she's going to do something,
She's going to do it.
She's going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so when you go on these assignments, you know, you work with all these probably writers, I'm assuming, or, you know, X, Y, and Z. Like, how does that correlate within the photograph? You know, do the newspaper or the magazine, do they have you go with the writer or the journalist to go over what you guys need to go over? How does that go about?
No, because it's photography is a visual language. I mean, the writer's going to get his story.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to tell it from his point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have an idea of what the story's going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily have to, like, I don't have to just regurgitate what the writer is going to say in words.
Mm-hmm.
I need to bring my own sense of journalism to the story and show how my picture can also help illuminate what the issue is.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when did you start?
Now, in the case of, let me cut you back.
Go
In the case
ahead.
of Serena Williams, and even I photographed the top soccer player in the world, Megan Rapinoe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know too much about soccer.
Yeah,
but.
Megan. And I photographed her holding a sledgehammer and wearing a very fashionable dress. And the reason we did that was because, hey, you know, we wanted to show her another side of her besides being an athlete, but we also wanted to have her hold that sledgehammer because she is a civil rights activist, and she's very outspoken as an athlete.
Right.
So we wanted to just give her that sense of power by holding that pickaxe, that sledgehammer in the photograph as she's busting through barriers for everyone.
Yeah, it's wild because I can only imagine as a photographer standpoint, you try to tell that story within a photograph or of whoever subject it is. You know, I guess you do your research based on the subject.
Well,
or?
it's a mix because when I do a cover. The cover of a magazine is really kind of an ad for the magazine. It has to stop people walking through the airport, at a newsstand, or in a Barnes and Noble, or in a drugstore. It has to stop people. It has to grab the person, you know, or you know. And when that picture ends up on the web, it has to stop the people from flipping for a moment, you know, from scrolling, to stop them, get their attention. So the cover cover concept is a combination of the photographer, the picture editor, the art director, and the big publisher and
Mm-hmm.
the editor of the magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and we all pitch ideas across.
Wow. Yeah.
And because I don't want this responsibility of just saying I'm going to make the cover for you. You know, I want to have, I want to know, what they think. They do the market research and they says, well, don't let her put her in a red dress because red is something.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know that. So they'll tell me stay away from red because it means this, or we don't want our readers to see that color. So it's my point is saying is that it's more of a collaboration.
Right.
It's not just a photographer.
Mm-hmm. That's good to hear because a lot of people think it's just one person or a couple people.
No, I mean it's on the set it's one person.
Yeah. But the behind the scenes
is a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people. And then also you have to realize that all those collaboration, all the notes and thoughts and the conversation, they only exist in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The photographer has to put all that knowledge, all the advice, all the thoughts, all the notes into his mind and create an image that reflects that,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much of just sure, someone could say to make them look like they're levitating. Well, photographers got to make them really look like they're levitating. Got to make them floating.
Right.
So
when did you start working for Sports Illustrated?
Well, I can't say exactly when, but I'd say around in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And
how was that transition from newspaper to that? Was you always working in a magazine around that time?
Well, while I
too?
was at the newspaper, I would always, one of my off time, I'd set commissions to work in a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can be a conflict of interest,
Mm-hmm.
but the type of assignments I was doing for the magazines were things that the newspaper wasn't doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd do business portraits for Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine, or I do a human interest story about a beauty queen in Venezuela for People magazine. These are stories that the newspaper wasn't doing, so there wasn't any conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to make the transition easier from going from newspapers to magazines, like I said before, I would always photograph any assignment I had as if it was for the magazine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
so when I just started to go freelancing full on, I already had a body of work
mm-hmm.
that looked like it was from a polished magazine photographer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the thing is, when you work for a newspaper, it's good because you get a variety of assignments. You do, like I said before, a fashion show, a fire, and then maybe a sporting event. All in the same day. So you learn a lot of things.
All in the same day?
Yeah, you
Wow.
get a lot of assignments.
Wow.
But the thing is, with working for a newspaper, the assignments that you're given, they're being put on your shoulders to do. So you're executing someone else's vision.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working 5 days of the week, every day, and you're getting all these different assignments, and you get a nice check, but you're not growing as an artist, because you're growing as an artist because if you care about your craft, you're gonna try to execute no matter what task you've been given in an artful manner. But the pictures are gonna kind of lack a little bit of you,
Mm-hmm.
So going into the magazine world where I'm freelancing, I can pick and choose the assignments, and also it gives me a lot of time to explore my personal work.
Mm-hmm.
Like I like doing landscapes, or I like doing conceptual portraiture, conceptual environmental portraiture. So I get the time to explore those things that are inside me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, when did you transition from that to Sports Illustrated?
Oh, okay. I transitioned from doing newspaper work and magazine work I left the newspapers and I was doing full-on magazine work, and then I got hired by Sports Illustrated based upon my environmental portraits.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get hired because of my knowledge of the game of sports or anything like that. I got hired because I could get a certain amount of intimacy, draw it out of the players. Like I'd be at their homes, or I'd be at the club with them, or I'd be with the car with them, or I'd go be with them while they drop their kids at school. Athletes would get comfortable with me, and I can get these nice, intimate, environmental portraits of them, which is a different skill set from, when you see when you watch a game on television, you see all the great photographers, sports photographers on the side of the field with their long lenses, and they're capturing peak action. It's beautiful work that they're doing because they know the sport and they're capturing these moments of incredible grace of the athlete floating through the air, So that's a different skill set than actually having to use a short lens, have some lights, and be in someone's home and have to talk to them and have to get them to be comfortable enough with you to open up and allow you to capture them in an evocative moment or make an evocative portrait.
And it falls back into telling their story.
Yeah.
And the picture story as well, too.
Yeah.
So, I've seen some of your work and all types of covers. It's on your website, of course. But how does it feel, honestly, to have your work on not only Sports Illustrated's covers, but a lot among all the publications in the world?
Well, it's it feels. Well, I just like to think. I just like to keep it moving.
Yeah.
I don't dwell too long on it. It's just like, okay, wow, this is cool, and then keep it moving because in our industry, you're only as good as your last cover, your last image.
Right.
But well, I shot Hank Aaron about a while back, and we were supposed to photograph him at the stadium in Atlanta, and what had happened was he called. We got set up at the stadium to photograph him there, and then I got a phone call saying that he wasn't going to be able to make the shoot, but he wanted me to come to his house to photograph him. So we got there. His wife opened up the doors to their home. It was me and two other assistants, and she offered us some iced tea and
the Southern hospitality.
Yeah, some nice Southern hospitality. And then we started talking about collard greens and stuff like that, and she got a kick out of that because we were debating if you should use pork or turkey for collard greens. And so that was kind of really nice. And then I started shooting Mr. Aaron's portraits and sitting on a chair just holding a baseball bat. And then towards the end of the shoot, he leaned over and he kissed his bat. And that's when I clicked my shutter. And that's a picture that probably one of the last portraits of Hank Aaron that was done. But towards the end of the shoot, I noticed that he was getting a little bit uncomfortable. And so I speeded up things. We just rushed it through the shoot. And then later, after the shoot was wrapped, I was loading up equipment. I got a call from my agent, and I said, and she was asking me how the shoot went. I said, oh, it went great. And she says, well, he had just got out of surgery he just got out of hip surgery 4 days ago. And I said, wow. And I said, he really should just been in bed. He should not have been squirming around doing modeling, getting his portrait taken for a photo shoot. But he said he was going to do it, and he did it. He did it.
Wow. That's crazy. Because that was probably the second or third person you said that they probably was going to do something throughout the day, and then they did it.
Yeah, they do it. Yeah, they do it. And I was honored that he knew that I was going to do him right, and I tried to do him right, in the portrait, to create an iconic image of him.
What would you say is the most proudest moment in your career so far, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I don't have like a moment. I photographed three presidents.
Oh wow, I didn't even know
Yeah,
that.
photographed three presidents. President Trump, before he was President Trump, Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, and Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So I photographed three presidents. So that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I've traveled around the world doing landscape photography, anywhere from Scotland to New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And I met a lot of great people on those hikes, and that's been something wonderful about being. That's something that's brought joy in my life. Mm-hmm. Just being able to do landscape photography. Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah. So but I would definitely go back to Hank Aaron, because my father was the same age as Hank Aaron, and they both grew up in Evergreen. But they both grew up in Alabama. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, in the 30s, growing up, it was very hard for African American men. Mm-hmm. So my dad at 18, he joined the American military and was sent off to the Korean War. And Hank Aaron, when he was 14, just started playing baseball. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Aaron went through a lot. A lot of racism against him, a lot of not getting his due as being a home run hitter, a top home run hitter ever. And he went through a lot, but he still had dignity in what he was doing. Mm-hmm. He had class. He was respectful, and just showed us that was a inspirational figure who, no matter what happened to him, would always did the right thing. Mm-hmm. And always showed that he would persevere no matter what they threw at him. Mm-hmm. As a player, and during his journey as to be a professional athlete. Right. Just dealing with the racism in the South in general. Mm-hmm. Not getting his due as an athlete. Right. But my father, while he was growing up, and while he was also going through his path, would always talk about Hank Aaron. Mm-hmm. And about how Hank Aaron inspired him. Mm-hmm. And
did you, when you photographed him, did you tell your dad about that when he was still here?
Oh, I told my dad after the shoot, mm-hmm. and he just got blown away. Wow. Yeah. Because Hank Aaron, it just inspired so many. I mean, it's like a choice of weapons. Right. Hank Aaron's weapon to escape poverty and escape racism and in the South was picking up the baseball bat. Mm-hmm. Many African American men, to escape the South, they joined the military. Mm-hmm. And in my father's case, he joined the army, and he got sent to Korea. And then while he was over in Korea, the Korean War started. So during that time period, black soldiers were not assigned to be troops, to be infantrymen. They were working as truck drivers or cooks or those type of jobs. Mm-hmm. But when the Korean War started, they all of a sudden handed the black soldiers weapons, and they said, "You're going to the front," Mm-hmm. So there were many African American heroes, black soldiers in that war, and they weren't even trained to do combat. Wow. They were just sent over there to do these kind of menial things, and then they end up being heroes. Wow. In the foxhole. Wow. So I can imagine that when they were in the foxhole, that these guys were thinking about Hank and what he was going through as well, and it was really so it's just interesting how the choices that black men made back then, and how much Hank Aaron inspired us, our fathers.
Yeah, I would say that's like probably has to be I can only imagine that's a good way or amazing story just for your lifetime or just your career. You know, probably just seeing over time different people, photographing different people, but just having the impact of that specific person that he had in the world. I can only imagine.
Well, like when I went to his house, he had all these portraits of himself with presidents and things like that, and dignitaries around the world. I mean, Hank Aaron was like is an icon, you know, and many people of all different nationalities admire him and how he persevered.
So, going back to your work, how would you honestly? I know you probably don't. You ain't gonna say it, but how would you describe your work honestly? Like, how would you honestly describe your work? What, like, your style of work, rather?
Wow, I would just say, I'd say insightful environmental portraits, sir. Empathetic imagery, insightful. I don't do a lot of over-the-top conceptual pictures. I think that kind of takes away from the subject and what the story you're trying to tell. You know, I keep my eyes open just for little telling moments. And like I said, when Hank Aaron kissed the bat, or just little moments. Like I just photographed Anthony Davis, who's a player for the Lakers in Los Angeles, in this old hotel called the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and it's where they filmed many famous films, like this film with Julia Roberts called Pretty Woman. But they gave us this room, and I set up my seamless, and after I did the portraits in the seamless, I saw this chandelier, and I had him raise the tennis ball to the chandelier while he was wearing his Lakers uniform. So that's when I can find a little moment like that, you know, it's really cool, and it's rewarding, because that means I probably created an image that people have never seen before, you know. I mean, because how many times you're gonna have access to a professional athlete at a swanky place in their uniform with $1 million chandelier over their head, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's nice when I'm able to find little things like that to capture, you know.
Yeah.
And I photograph all kinds of people. I photograph like Little Kim on a yacht, you know, and being handed a Gucci bag. So, you know, just fun things, or Trina, or
yeah, because I see you got XXL in
yeah,
your archives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's a legendary
Tribe Called Quest, or who's from the Wu-Tang Crew?
You got Old Dirty Bastard, you got RZA, you have Ghostface Killer.
Killer.
Yeah, you do have
one.
one.
Ghostface Killer. Yeah. So, and again with Ghostface Killer, I used my large format camera.
Wow. Yeah, it do look like, by me just remembering how the portrait is.
I used my 8x10 camera for that. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
and it's funny because he came to the shoot, and he wasn't crazy about the wardrobe, and you know, I just like, and I don't really come off like from being, from being the hippest brother in the world, but but my assistant was very hip, and her name was Tiagi, the makeup artist. So she cooled him down and everything, and got him together, and she's from the Bronx and he's from the Bronx, so you know they kind of talk their Bronx language together, and I was able to do a great portrait of him. You know,
it was like a bank in the background.
No, it was at a studio, but we brought all these props in, this giant bank crank gear, and we made this floor of like steel to put it down, just these metal plates down.
So that's actually interesting, you know. Man, I think you should get a pat on the back for that, because it's like you got a lot of things that you've done. I honestly feel like you humble. Humble.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's been a journey, and I've been, you know, and I'm thankful for all the opportunities I've been given, you know, from like I said, during fashion in Milan, London, and Paris to doing portraits of indigenous people fishing off the coast of in the Straits of Magellan in Chile. You know,
right.
Like I said before, one thing that we've been blessed by being in the craft of photography is that, you know, it opens a lot of doors, and people, like, for the most part, they like to have their image made, you know, because they like so much to have people express an interest in them, you know.
I remember earlier you were saying about you're doing your book of portraits or pictures that you worked for over 35 years. Like, how does that even feel for just going through your archives and just remembering, like, oh dang, I took this picture, I forgot about it, and I just, you know, remember. How does that feel on your note?
It's, well, you know, I think I remember mainly like the little things that happen. Like, I think I don't know if I said the story before, but I have pictures of Usain Bolt when he was 18 years old, playing video games at his home. And did I talk about that earlier? But
very
anyway,
briefly, though.
Anyway, I got shots of him. I think I told the story earlier. So let me skip to another Jamaican. I also was assigned to photograph the Jamaican bobsled team, the women's team. And we had all these in Jamaica. So we had all these setups. Like, out by the airport, I had them deliver these huge blocks of ice.
Wow.
And I put them on the sand on the beach, and I had them sitting on these cubes of ice, these huge blocks of ice, you know, in Jamaica, the hot Jamaican sun, for that story. And then I took them up in the mountains to photograph them in the mountains in the sugarcane field. And some hoodlums came. Well, I don't want to say hoodlums. Some over enthusiastic people came by, and these two ladies on a Jamaican bobsled team, they pulled out 45s.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they were packing. I said, I didn't know you had that. They said, yeah, we had that. You know, so those are kind of little fun little ventures you have as a photographer. And then in the evening, I took them to a fishing village, and I photographed them sitting on the edge of a boat that said "God's mercy." You know,
wow.
So I guess I just have those great kind of memories.
Yeah,
it's
those
kind of memories, and like even like rappers, like I photographed Trina wearing a very sexy bikini. No, not Trina. Jackie O.
Wow. Jackie O's a legend.
Jackie O in an ice cream parlor in Miami licking an ice cream cone. So, you know, that was kind of a fun story, you know. So, you know, it's one thing about photography, if you have a good idea and the client will go for it, you know, it's kind of cool to make those images, you know.
So, me knowing you being traveling over the world and going to different places, how do you honestly keep a balance from your work life to, you know, your own personal I guess you could say personal or your own space? Like, how do you keep the balance? Because, you know, you're a busy person, you're a busy man. So,
well, it's funny because it's raining today, but if it wasn't raining, I'd probably take you in my garden. I got a garden in my backyard.
Yeah.
So when I get off the road, I just kind of chill. I just sit in my garden and grow whatever I can, and just relax. You know, let the world settle down inside my soul. Because, like I said, being a photographer, you have to actually be there. And you know, these are like, I'm with these people, and it's very stressful. You know, and I don't let the stress get to me. I just focus on accomplishing the assignment. You know, you know, when you get an assignment, if the subject says no to your first idea, don't get upset, don't get all negative, just move on to the next idea. And if that doesn't work, then you say, hey, well, what would you like to do? You know, but you got to keep it flowing, keep the shoot moving, and just be optimistic about it. You know, and it'll come together.
Right. Yeah, like, you know, that's good advice, especially for me, because, you know, you get anxiety a little bit because it's like the person is telling you no, and then you're like, oh, now I gotta think of, oh, what? Well, not, you don't gotta think about it because you would already have the second idea rolling, but then that person says no to that, that's a good idea for telling what would you like to do, because that brings a whole collaborative type of perspective.
Yeah, you got to bring them into it,
Yeah.
And then you asked me a question earlier, and I didn't really finish it. But yes, for the past, I don't know, about 30 years, I've been doing portraits of these athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, Usain Bolt, all when they were younger. And so I discovered that during the pandemic, that I had all these pictures. And I said, and I called out to some editors, and they suggested that I put them together in a book. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping to get a book of my portraits, 35 years of sports portraits published.
I think you should, because I want to see, I even seen probably like 2 years ago, I'm from Liberty City as well, as you know, and seeing like the portraits that you took of Overtown and Liberty City, and just seeing how crisp it is. And I never really seen that, I never seen, my town in that light around that time. You just see like regular stuff, but just seeing how you just took the picture and you documented the people that came from where I came from in a more powerful perspective, and that's crazy. So yeah, I think you should. Well, you are going to drop the book, but
well, I mean, it's not just like, it's going to be like one of the first beats when I was working for Sports Illustrated. Mm-hmm. was like they would just put me with the athlete. Like I said before, I'd go to the club with them, or go to the barber shop with them, or get in their car. I do all these things, that are different than just going to the stadium and photographing them in action. I've got portraits of them that are insightful, that tell the other side of who they are, tell a little bit more beyond them being phenomenal athletes.
What do you think is the misconceptions of being a photographer as a whole?
Well, I mean, I don't. What do I think the misconception is? Mm-hmm. Well, I think I won't really address that in the way you're asking, but I will say this, that it's important to realize that photography is a visual language. Mm-hmm. So it behooves a photographer to understand that and to try to produce images that communicate.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see photography going in the future? Because you've seen from film to digital, and then now digital is headed into another types of digital, I guess. I don't know, but where do you see photography going in the future?
Well, it's a matter of how people are trained to consume the images, It's going right now. There's still a block of people who appreciate a print or appreciate a book, you know. And I think even now maybe it'll come full circle, because right now a lot of people only like the images on devices and things like that. Mm-hmm. But when you look at a picture on a device, you're being trained to keep scrolling through the images,
right?
So you don't really look at the picture,
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we have galleries and magazines and books and things like that, there's going to be a place for pictures that are a little bit more insightful and in depth, So I can't say where it's going to be, if it's going to be some sort of like virtual reality thing, or it depends on how people choose to consume images,
Mm-hmm. So what would be one thing you would tell the younger you of what you know now?
Oh no, I would tell the younger me, just keep going for it. Just keep thinking bigger and bigger and bigger. Don't see yourself that, hey, right now I'm shooting for a small little supermarket magazine, whatever, or a small little village newspaper or something. Believe in yourself. Continue believing in yourself that one day you'll be your work will be in a gallery somewhere. I just tell myself to just don't see you as you are, see you as you want to be.
Mm-hmm. All right. So one last question. Other than that advice, what advice would you give to the people that want to pursue the same thing that you're pursuing today, or overall your whole career? Because I look up to you, so every time I'm blessed that I could get advice from you and stuff like that. But for the the viewers, what advice would you give them?
Well, the advice I give someone who wants to become a photographer or grow in visual arts is to learn who they are. I would say learn who they are as a person. Try to learn what they have to say, and try to have something to say as an artist, you know. And try to learn to say it in their unique way. And don't get too caught up with trends and things like that. Try to be your own messenger, you know. Try to think a little bit deeper, and try to have a heart, put your heart into things, and just keep the faith that people will understand what you're trying to say. You know, it's hard to say that go try to get a newspaper job, because those don't really exist. But what you can do is go to the library and study photographs and just teach yourself the visual language of photography.
Right.
And then digest that, and then try to figure out what you want to say as an artist. And then maybe let the people come to you, you know.
So how can the people get in contact with you if they want to just follow what you got going on in the future or whatever the case may be?
Well, it's funny because my agent says that the best way to meet people, the best way to get your work out there, is Instagram at the moment. So I can be reached on Instagram, Jeffery Salter, Jeffery Salter. You can catch me there, or you can go to my website, which is www.jefferysalter.com. And I'm sure there'll be links after this on the YouTube,
on the
as
description
well,
and everything.
Description to catch up with me. And feel free to hit me up with a direct message. That's fine. I answer that. And all I could furthermore to say, just keep the faith, keep shooting, and believe in yourself as an artist.
Again, I just want to say this is an honor. I'm blessed that I'm able to interview you, because I just wanted to pick your brain and see, because we never really had that conversation of how you came up. So it's just honestly just to document this interview and just talk with you is an honor. Just want to let you know that.
Well, I'm full of gratitude for you being here, and like I said, I appreciate everything you've done for me, and the great exchange of energy. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. So this is episode 40 of the Behind the Beard podcast with Jeffery Salters, and that's it. We out.
Ciao.